Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again from Film Fanatic headquarters. It is a Wednesday morning around 10 o'clock. Hope everyone's doing good. I want to thank everybody again for their support. It's been, I don't know, a pretty exciting week here at Film Fanatic headquarters. I had a whole bunch of likes the last week and a half, which has been really awesome. I should say, a whole bunch of new subscribers. And that's been really awesome. I noticed a big influx of new folks subscribing to the channel the last week and a half. So it's been really cool. I kind of doubled up on some of my shows. There was, we had some pretty rough weather last weekend, so I was homebound a little bit more, had a little bit more free time. So I did a couple of more videos. I did 2 videos a day for a little while, so I don't know, it kind of increased the amount of videos I've been putting up. I usually do 1 video a day, but over a period of a few days, I ended up putting up like 2 videos a day. So, and then yesterday I did 2 videos. I don't usually do that just because of the time that sometimes it takes to do the video. Usually do one a day, but I don't know. It's been cool. I noticed it's increased doing. It's obviously seems like it's helped the channel, and it's helped help that much more with people subscribing to the channel. So that's been really cool. So I really appreciate the people you know uh, cranking up the numbers, helping out with that, and that's really great. And so yeah, and I'm always on. It's always like, well, now it's just like a natural part for my daily routine is to do a video every day, and when I can, I'll do a couple, but I try not to miss a day doing a video. I really enjoy it. It's 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 like two things for me, and one or I should say, like, it's really 3 things, but as to why I do them. But the main reason is it's just a lot of fun. I get to talk about the movies that I really love, and especially lately, I've been talking about a lot of movies that I've just discovered for the first time, and I've just been really blown away by a whole bunch of new movies that I've been buying over the last few months, and then also mixing that in with a lot of films that I have seen that I've recently or the last couple of years have bought on Blu-ray, and and it's just a lot of fun. And on the second part of it would probably be that I just feel like it helps me kind of develop the presentation, trying to get the align the ideas that I want to talk about around the films, helps me focus a little bit more. And I feel like with each video and each little step I take, it gets a little bit better. And eventually all the videos would be really great and consistent, and I think they're pretty good. But you know, it's just part of that process of learning and how to articulate things better and keep things a little bit more focused and bring more variety to the videos and to the content that I'm putting up. And the other thing is that, to me, it's the third thing would be, for me, it's just it's pure therapy. I don't know. I feel better after I do a video. I feel it's a good way for me to kind of start my day. It's like a healthy outlet. It feels like a healthy release. And I notice if I don't do it, even if it's a day like, say, for instance, on Sunday, I didn't have. Sunday was a very busy day for the most part, and I didn't have the time to really do it. There was a couple hours in the morning I did that I had some time, and I managed to shoot a video. I did a video, but then I was gone all day, and basically after I left, while I was getting ready to leave the house to do what I needed to do, I started uploading the video, and then later that night I came back I was basically gone all day, and I came back like later that night. The video was done, and then I uploaded it that night, and I felt like, oh, okay, okay, I did it. So even in that context, I felt better. So I generally don't like to miss, unless I absolutely have to, but I generally now I try to make it happen even on a day that I don't necessarily have the time to do it. But generally, with the schedule that I have and the way I do these videos, it's a lot easier because I to crank them out. But I notice I feel differently if I don't do a video. I don't feel as sparked up and more just into the day if I don't do a video. So it's yeah, it's basically all three of those things. So so today I'm going to be talking about a movie that I've been wanting to talk about for quite a long time. It's a movie. It's a movie that's right out of the decade that most of the films that I've been doing on this channel have been from the 70s and the 80s. I have been doing films from all different the various different decades, but my favorite period is like the 70s and the 80s. Obviously out of nostalgic reasons, but particularly around the films that I really have been diving deeply into lately, and that's like the B movie genre or the exploitation genre, horror exploitation, the grindhouse films, all those things. I kind of look at all of those films as kind of being all under the same umbrella, meaning that they have like a great cheesy quality, if you will. The acting isn't great. The script is a little bit askew at times, but they're also very, very low budget. They have a real grittiness to them, and they're just, in a lot of ways, they're just a lot of fun. And to me, it always brings me back to the essence as to what I think drives me or gives me the passion that I have for films, and it's really about those hours or that time spent watching a movie, whether it's at home or in a theater, to where it's pure escapism. That's it. And regardless of if it's a maybe a film that has a little bit more of a serious subject matter, or it's a little bit more kind of in the fantasy realm, or even if it's purely surrealistic, it just comes to that. It always strikes that point with me over and over again where it's those films for me represent true escapism, and that's at the core, stripping away everything else, why I love these films so much, because it just automatically uh, transports me. I feel transported to a different place. So this movie here is the original Swamp Thing. This movie I have an incredibly long history with. This came out in 1982. It was directed by one of the greatest American horror directors, I think, that we've ever seen, Wes Craven. He unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but I love his work to death. I did a show on probably, well, pretty much my favorite film of his, Last House on the Left, which I think is the like kind of epitome of like the quintessential grindhouse movie. I just love that movie so much because it's so incredibly raw, so in your face, and it's, I don't know, it's like to me, watching that movie is like putting on a classic punk rock album. It's just gritty, it's raw. There's like, there are those, and it's not perfect. It's, but it's just got this attitude, and it pushes the boundaries. it's not clean. It doesn't have there's no there's you know there's nothing about it is sanitized. It's just coming at you like a wild animal. And it's, just a great movie experience. And but at the same time that movie is incredibly uh hard to watch and brutal, and it really pushes the envelope. And I think for a lot of people, and even for me, there are things in that movie, because essentially that movie, the core of that movie is about the experience that I find that probably collectively people like really focuses on our most primal fear as a species, and that's the scenario of like home invasion. So it really pushes those boundaries and in every way. And it's so raw, it's so in your face, and it doesn't have maybe the best qualities to it, say compared to like quote unquote a highbrow movie. Like the acting isn't necessarily 5 stars, or the script isn't necessarily in that level, but it just adds that kind of punk rock flavor to it, because it doesn't have that highbrow quality. It just has I don't know, an extra layer of grittiness to it, and that's why I just love that movie to death. Uh, my first Wes Craven movie that I ever saw, like probably most kids growing up in the '80s, was Nightmare on Elm Street, which I'll eventually do a show on. That movie is so talked about and has been discussed so many times. Sometimes I get in that mindset of like covering a movie like that, where what else could I, what could I add to that conversation? Because a movie, it's such an iconic movie, and it's also been just talked about so much. But I'll eventually do a show on it. I'll eventually do a show on it. That was one of the things of why I was to a degree reluctant to do a show on, say, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, one of my all-time favorite movies. But again, on the same at the same regard, on in the same, or related to the same subject, it's a movie that's so talked about and has been examined, and really and it's been so highly embraced by so many people. What else could I add to the conversation? But I love that film so much that I decided to do a show on that, and so that kind of outweighs the reluctancy on my part. So I'll eventually do a show on that, and that's, I would say Nightmare on Elm Street is definitely the most popular of his films, and then also I would say out of Wes Craven's career, the other ones that would probably be bigger or just as huge would be the Scream franchise. A lot of, I mean, I think those films in particular introduced a whole new generation to horror, to horror, to the horror genre. And commercially, like those films, and especially the franchise itself, is definitely the biggest. Those made the most money. But what I tend to do, and I'll eventually do a show on some of those films because I do like them. I do love the first one quite a bit. It's a huge franchise. I've actually only seen the first Scream movie, which is kind of crazy. I think there's like 6 or 7 of them. And I keep hearing more and more about them because there is a new one coming out this year. And I keep hearing more and more about them, that they actually are really good. But I just haven't seen the other ones. But I will like eventually do that. And I will like probably eventually do a show on Scream. But usually what I try to do is I try to like focus on the films, like say, well, like for example, when I'm talking about Wes Craven, I'll try to focus on the films that maybe are a little bit less talked about that I really love. And I think those movies that are maybe a little bit less talked about, for example, with Wes Craven, even though it is a very it is very much a movie that is widely uh, embraced by people who like exploitation movies. But outside of that, maybe not so much. I don't really hear people talking about it so as much compared to say Nightmare or the Scream films. But that's why like I'll try to put a little bit more emphasis, like say on movies like Last House on the Left. And this movie, I think, is also one of those films. This is a movie I grew up on as a kid. You know, this was like an integral part of my youth growing up. I, used to watch this all the time on VHS. It was on cable. It was on, I believe this movie was like heavily on rotation on, back in the day on cable. It was like it was like syndicated. It's kind of a movie that could be considered to be, I don't know, to a degree, like a TV movie. Like it's not a hard R rating, so it was on television quite a bit because of the rating, and and then I also remember always renting this on VHS, and I love this film so much, and so it was always a part of my youth growing up. And I bought this edition about probably 2 years ago. I just watched it again last night, and I just love this movie. I just love and again, it goes back to the time period that I just love so much. It's such a great representation of the '80s. It's right from 1982. It's got a level of where it's so incredibly cheesy and it's so campy. It's pure 80s cinema, like 101. And it's such a fun movie. I just think it's such a fun movie. It's got aspects of it, growing up too. Also, I was a huge, and I still am, but growing up, especially in that period when I was a kid, I was an avid comic book collector, and I always loved Swamp Thing. I have tons of Swamp Thing comic books. I've always been enamored with his character, and the comic books were always, for the most part, they were always a little bit more on the serious side. They tended to be a little bit more on the darker side of things, where things were very, uh, I guess, the storylines and the character itself of Swamp Thing, things were a little bit more on the serious side. And I kind of love what Wes Craven did with this film because he kind of turned it a little bit on the side, on its head a little bit, just by kind of messing with the tone of the comic book and the original story, making it, more of a, putting it in more of a campy kind of a light, and it's a little bit more of a slightly like more over the top, whimsical kind of view of the movie and the story. But yet, I think it still has those darker traits around the movie also, and the movie still has those great traits that were from the original comic book that gives it a little bit more of a gives it a little bit more grit, and it has some of those darker aspects. But overall, it has a little bit more of a goofier, sillier vibe than the comic books. And I always loved that about it. I thought it was a cool balance. It was a film that like where like the comic books were very serious. At least that's what I always got as a kid from it. And and it took itself pretty seriously. Where the thing I love about the film, or this movie in particular, was that it was a little bit more silly and campy, and it didn't take itself quite as serious. And and the other thing that I love about it is the effects. The effects in it are at the same time, they're just amazing and incredible, but they're so bad. They're so cheesy and campy, and so so ridiculous. But again, it's one of the reasons I love these films so much. And I definitely consider this to be a B movie. I definitely put it in the world of kind of the B movie underground cult exploitation world. The reason I feel it fits into that category is because of that. It has these really bad effects, but it's got a cool story, and I think it's got some really cool heart. It's entertaining as all hell. It does, like I said before, it has some of the darker elements still intact from the original storyline, and it's just a good balance. And it's super entertaining. I think it's a cool movie where you could, watch it to a degree with like a family, but then, or watch it with kids, but then you can also watch it as an adult and still get that, you know, get the essence from the movie and still enjoy it on an adult level. And so it's a really cool balance of those things. And it's just so, it's such a, an example of just classic 80s camp. And when I bought this on Blu-ray, I was super excited because it's a huge package. Like it comes with two discs. There's a DVD version of it, and then there's also a Blu-ray version of it, and it comes with like all kinds of special features. It's packed. This came out on Shout Factory. Shout Factory is another company that does a pretty good job with putting out a lot of low budget horror films, especially around the 80s. Um, the cast, the cast is just phenomenal. Adrienne Barbeau is in this. Adrienne Barbeau was one of my favorite actresses from the 80s. I remember the first time that I saw her as a kid in a movie, and that was in John Carpenter's The Fog. And that's one of my all time favorite 80s horror movies. I love that movie to death. Adrienne Barbeau in that movie is just a rock star. She was a model, a pinup girl for a long time, and she was just drop dead gorgeous back in that time period. But she also was kind of regarded as like a scream queen. She was in a whole bunch of other horror films during that time, and she's just fantastic. And I remember like as a kid the first movie I came across her as or discovered her as an actress was John Carpenter's The Fog, and she made a bunch of movies in the 80s, a bunch of other horror films, and then that was one of my attractions. She was like one of the most beautiful women in films at the time, and and she's the lead in this, and that was like instantly as a kid I was like, okay, I'm in this, I'm invested. Also stars Ray Wise, who Ray Wise is an amazing actor. Um, I love his diverse career. I think he's a pretty underrated director. He was in the original Twin Peaks series that was, directed, the TV series that was directed by David Lynch. He plays Laura Palmer's father, and he plays one of the most disturbing characters I think ever seen on the screen, and so complicated and so horrifically scary, and then he plays essentially the Swamp Thing in this film, and it's such a different role. Like you can't even recognize him in this movie because it's in comparison he's like pretty silly and goofy. He's kind of like he's kind of he's kind of a sleazy guy in this movie. He's a married scientist. He's doing all these experiments, and Adrienne Barbeau is like his assistant, and he's like trying to hit on her all the time, and he's kind of a scumbag, but he's like totally goofy and silly and just awkward. And he's like the lead guy, he's like the lead character. He is essentially Swamp Thing. But he's great. He's fantastic. And Ray Wise was in. He's been in so many great movies over the years. I think he's a pretty underrated actor. Swamp Thing itself, or himself, was played by Dick Durock, who was a pretty famous actor in the 70s. He was in a lot of the Clint Eastwood movies. He was in, I believe he was in a few of the Dirty Harry movies. And he was a pretty famous actor for quite a while. Dick Durock. Pretty extensive career. Some of the movies Dick Durock was in, a pretty extensive list. He was also in The Return of Swamp Thing, which came out in 1989. He was in the Clint Eastwood movie Any Which Way You Can't. He was in Delirious with John Candy. He was also in Stand By Me, which is crazy, the classic Stephen King story and movie. He was in the Schwarzenegger movie from 1980 that came out in 1986, Raw Deal. He was in the Clint Eastwood, The Enforcer, which I believe is probably his most well-known movie. He's pretty awesome in that. He was also in Silverado, Blind Date, The Nude Bomb, Mr. North, and Runaway Train. So he was a pretty famous actor in the 70s and 80s. So the casting in this film is just so great. And the other actor in this that is just so great is Louis Jourdan. He plays the villain in this film, and he was in a Alfred Hitchcock movie, The Paradise Case. And he was in a bunch, actually quite a few of Alfred Hitchcock's films. Pretty wild. He was in a film called Letter from an Unknown Woman, Gigi, The Best of Everything, the VIPs, and Octopussy, the James Bond movie. A really, iconic actor. So the cast in this film is just tremendous. And it's so, again, like I said, it's just such a totally entertaining movie, in like every way. It's again, it has all of the great. To me, it's like the epitome of all the great things that made up the '80s. One of the other factors of this movie that I think is just so cool is the is Reggie Batts. He is the little kid sidekick in this movie, and I believe he was like, I don't know, maybe 12 or 13 when he was cast in this movie. There's a really great documentary with him that, and this Blu-ray edition came out of just only a few years ago. I believe it came out after Wes Craven had passed away. But there's a great interview with Adrienne Barbeau in it and the whole cast, and a great documentary about Swamp Thing. But there's a really great interview with Reggie Batts, and he's phenomenal in this movie. I mean, that's his relationship with Adrienne Barbeau is so great in the film. I think that's one of the reasons why, as silly and as ridiculous as the movie is at times, I think their chemistry on screen and the story and their relationship with Swamp Thing, there's a lot of heart, and there's a lot of they just have great chemistry, and I feel like that's kind of what is so cool about this movie, is that essence, those relationships with those three characters is so strong that, along with the really campy factor to this movie and almost dated quality to this film, just makes it more enjoyable. It's a great balance. But the chemistry of Reggie Batts and Adrienne Barbeau on the big screen, and in this movie is just phenomenal. And it really, to me, I think it is pretty much the essence of why this movie is still around and is regarded as a a great cult classic. It's just so great. I just love it. The transfer of this on Blu-ray is just phenomenal. The remastering is just incredible. Just such a great movie. One of the greatest classic '80s B movie slash exploitation movies ever made. Just super campy and super fun, but it has a lot of heart and soul. And it's funny because there's a guy I follow on YouTube who's pretty good, but I don't know. It's and again, it's I don't want to live in a world where, I mean, the world would be really boring and probably dull if everybody had the same opinion, and I never, you know, have this view of where if people don't agree with me on certain things, then that makes them wrong because I'm all knowing. I try not to ever take that position. I think when it comes to certain things, I feel like I've put in time into like researching them and really checking out certain things and having enough of open mind that I feel like okay, maybe I do have a valid opinion. But again, it's just an opinion. And my favorite quote of all time, which I've talked about before, is from Larry Flint, who was the great founder and publisher of Hustler magazine, and also I think in a lot of ways, a true patriot. But he one of my favorite quotes of his is that he would always say, "Well, opinions are like assholes. We all have one." And I just think that's just great. That sums it all up. But it's a funny thing, like the YouTube guy I watch, this guy Cody Leach, he's had a YouTube channel for probably 5 years or so. In the last few years, he's gotten really huge. He's one of those guys now that he's able, for the last 3 years or so, he's been able to. He makes a living solely off of his channel, and he's a very successful YouTube guy. He does mostly all horror films, covers a lot of older ones, but his main focus seems to be on very new contemporary horror films, and as well with television shows. And but I have this funny reaction to a lot of his reviews. I think he's a smart guy. I think he is uh, extremely opinionated, which is good. And I think he is to a degree a real like I think generally he really loves all things horror. But there are some times when I watch his show and some of the things that he says that I just become so irritated by. And it's a fine balance because I'm not a confrontational person. I'm not one to get into debates with people. I mean, I'm all about getting into debates with people. But when it comes to this day and age, a lot of the times when you're debating with somebody, or the avenue that people use to debate with people is through social media, and unfortunately, a lot of the times it ends up becoming, really trashy and just like, uh, and it just ends up descending into like a lot of bullshit, and where people are kind of nasty to each other. So a lot of the times I don't do that. I think people can have really healthy debates and discussions on things, and at the same time being completely respectful of each other's opinions, but don't be, and without having to be, you can do that without being a dick. But I think too often now that happens the other way around, where people are they have their opinion. They wear it, they wave it like a flag, and if you, you know, disagree with them, it's right away looked at as this like personal attack. And I think, and that's due to social media. But I do think that people can have those talks and debates without getting personal and not being an ass. I have had that encounter with people where I've really disagreed with what they've said, and we've been able to keep it civil and respectful. And the case with like for example, Cody Leach just did a show on Wes Craven. He did a whole like ranking of all of the Wes Craven movies, and it was hilarious because the two movies, and I think he's got Wes Craven has a great. There's a lot of great films he made. He's kind of one of my favorite directors. I always love listening to interviews with him. He was a brilliant man. Aside from just being an awesome filmmaker, I think he was a real pioneer, and really was doing things. He was really innovative and ahead of his time, and I think he was a director too that could like, kind of find this balance of like doing these like really low budget kind of exploitation movies, like films like this and Last House on the Left, but then also being able to tote that line and do like more commercial films, but still have the ability to tell a good story, like say Scream. And being really innovative, especially around new concepts, like say Freddy Krueger, and the essence, and the originality that movie really brought to the table. But it was funny because he did a show recently on Wes Craven, and the two movies that I love the most, meaning my favorite Wes Craven movie is The Last House on the Left, the original. I'm not a big fan of the remake. I've seen it, and I just thought it was a really bad kind of sanitized version. It's okay at times, but I just felt like it was overall like a sanitized version of the film, and it just wasn't as raw and in your face. But my two favorite films of Wes Craven, first one being Last House on the Left, and then Swamp Thing. And they're both so different because Last House on the Left is like really brutal and in your face and just like coming at you like an animal, and then this is like really silly and goofy and campy. But they're both so great movies. And it was funny because those two movies he trashed the most on his list. He disregarded those films the most. I think I can't exactly remember, but I think the top movie of his was Nightmare on Elm Street for his list, and then also one of the Scream movies were the top ones. And I just thought it was hilarious because, and he basically basted both movies for the same thing. He went after the Last House on the Left and also this movie pretty uh, aggressively, and basically said that these movies are just so like dated. Like for example, for Last House on the Left, he basically said that movie is so dated. It's the budget is terrible. The quality isn't really great. It's overly hyped. It's really not that violent as like the reputation that movie had and still has to a degree, where it was like a movie that was banned. It made the video nasties list in the late 70s and 80s. And it always had a reputation of being just an incredibly harsh and brutal movie. He felt, well, no, by today's standards, this movie is just like kind of weak, and it's not really, it doesn't have any of those qualities. And he just trashed it for being I felt it was really dated, and that the acting was bad. It was too low budget. It was too raw, and he even thinks of it and classifies that movie as like a grindhouse movie. But he just totally trashed it. And then the same thing he did for Swamp Thing, where he said the effects are terrible. It's too dated. It's too much. Uh, it's so much of an 80s film that it's dated. The acting isn't really great. It's too campy and it's too silly. Basically, the same. He kind of attacked both movies and trashed them completely for the same reasons. And it's so funny because for me, those exact reasons as to why he attacked those movies and just said that they're so dated and they're like they have this cheeseball factor, and they're too low budget. The acting isn't really great. Those are all the reasons why I think, for me, are the highest qualities as to why I love these movies so much and why they're on my list. And I just think it's hilarious. Like, so I just don't think like, and again, he can have his opinion and that's fine, but I just don't think um, he gets it. I don't think he gets it. I think it's like I kind of feel like he's kind of a square, to be honest. I just don't. I think he takes things too seriously and just doesn't understand a cool thing when he sees it, or just doesn't understand something that's cool and hip when he sees it, or experiences it. I just think he's a little bit of a square pants, SpongeBob minus the square pants, and I just don't get it. And it's not that I'm like a specialist, but you know, I have an open mind, and I think I kind of know what I'm talking about on certain things, but he just misses the point of those films, and I'm like, you know, that's those things exactly. You know, the reasons that you're trashing the movie or trashing these movies is exactly why I think makes them great, and why I feel like those movies, Last House on the Left and Swamp Thing, why they have a longevity, because they have that cult like status. They have this, you know, they both have this raw quality that is just fun in a lot of ways. And I know you're saying Last House on the Left, like equating that or using the word fun to describe that film is probably a big stretch, but still that escapist thing. So it's just funny. I don't think he gets it. I don't think he understands, and he can like what he likes, but you know, those reasons, those qualities as to why I love those two movies so much and why I go back to them. And I feel like in some ways they were ahead of their time, but again, it's just a matter of opinion. So, but if you haven't seen this classic, I highly recommend it. It's such a great and awesome ride, particularly if you get to see this on Blu-ray. It's killer. This package, especially like I said a few minutes ago, is just great. It's packed with all kinds of wonderful special features. It came out, I believe, a couple of years or so after Wes Craven had passed away. So unfortunately, there's not any interviews with Wes Craven on here. But it's still great and really interesting. The DVD, the Blu-ray that I have for Last House on the Left has extensive interviews with Wes Craven. That came out quite a few years ago. That's really great. Such an articulate, such an intelligent guy, and just had such uh, a real balance on making things, having a little bit of a social message in some of his films, particularly around Last House on the Left, with a lot of the, uh, you know, Vietnam War kind of influence that that film had, and what, seeing horrific things on television. But yet he had a cool balance of like taking social matters that were existing during that period, but not being heavy-handed about it, and being and not and where that film never comes across as preachy. Really great, and I think that's a testimony to Wes Craven, just having that sensibility around that, and still, uh, you know, and at the end of the day, just giving the world a really great film without being too heavy-handed about issues that might have really influenced those films. You can see it in that film, but it's never preachy. It's never well, it's never telling you, well, you have to be anti-war to love this film. I mean, I love the balance, and I think it's testimony to the brilliance of Wes Craven as a filmmaker. But again, Swamp Thing is the shit. It's amazing. It's classic 1982. It's the epitome of classic, campy horror exploitation movies done in one of the best decades ever in cinematic history in the 80s. So please check this out if you've never seen it. So this is Jason Dean. I'm going to sign off today for the day. And so thanks again for your support. And we will see you next time. Peace.